3 minutes after 10 is the time, and it is not the most important element of the conversation that we are about to have, not by a long chalk, but given some of the calls we took earlier in the week, I do find myself wondering whether Kemi Badenoch this morning is comfortable with Brianna Ghey being afforded her preferred pronouns, even in death. Some pause for thought there, actually. Mrs. Justice Yip today decides whether or not two teenagers who were 15 at the time of this crime should be named, whether you should know their name. Brianna was stabbed 28 times by a girl and a boy whom she believed to be her friends and who had, in fact, as the court heard, been plotting her murder for weeks. She was lured under false pretences to an area of woodland near her home in Cheshire, just outside Warrington. And I don't need to go into much more detail. You will almost certainly be aware of what happened next. It took the jury 4 hours and 40 minutes to decide that the killers, who sought to blame each other for the killing, were both guilty. I never know how much, I never know how much to read into reports like this, the report that neither teenager showed any visible reaction to the verdicts, because it's such an extraordinary situation. I don't know that imagining how you would behave in the same circumstances is particularly helpful. But it is one of those cases that you feel almost compelled to look away from. You really do. 5 minutes after 10 is the time, and you really can't. So the question, here's the thing, right? Just bear with me for a moment. My job is to have opinions, right? And the luckiest element of my job is the fact that I don't have to pretend anything. Every single opinion I've ever shared with you is genuine. I've changed my mind about stuff, but I never have to change. I never have to argue something different from what I actually believe. But when I started off in this business, I did sometimes have to argue differently from what I believed. I was on a TV show on Channel 5 called The Right Stuff, presented by Matthew, who will be with you over the Christmas period. I've been spending weekend mornings with you recently. Matthew Wright. Excellent broadcaster, very nice chap. But the format of the programme was such that the two other people on the panel, myself and another journalist, would have to adopt opposing views on an issue of the day. So now they're going to book people who they know to be at odds. You don't have the same, very rarely does a programme have the same panellists. We're a bit ahead of the curve, really. Everything on the telly these days is two people having an argument about something in the papers. But when we started doing that show, it was still quite rare. But the problem, of course, with having a permanent panel is that on many mornings, you're going to agree with each other. You're both going to have the same opinion. And such was my cockiness, I suppose, that I would, more often than not, adopt the contrary opinion to the one that both panellists held in order to keep the programme buzzing along, and also as a sort of slightly vainglorious oratorical exercise to prove how clever I was, that I could argue against what I believed. But I do remember, as many people will have thought of in the last few weeks as this trial has unfolded, I do remember the case of James Bulger. It's burnt on my memory like it's burnt in yours. That footage, that photograph, that still from the CCTV that saw two children leading away a notably smaller child to a grim and bloody death was, I think we can use a word that's often misused or overused. It was haunting. You are probably still, when I remind you of it, you are probably still haunted by it. And I only mention this because I can't remember whether or not my arguments at the time that the killers, Thompson and Venables, you can still remember their names, were victims of appalling home life. Some of the details of what had happened in their homes went some way towards explaining the desensitizing process which you would have to have been through in order to have ended up committing the kind of crimes that they committed. I couldn't actually remember. I can't actually remember what my true opinion was at the time. And I only mention that because I've been analysing my feelings about this case quite closely. And there were moments yesterday when I was really reading into it and watching some of the reporting on the news. There were moments yesterday where if you had my thoughts wired up to a needle, and the needle went right up to death penalty as what the consequences of certain crimes should be, or as what I would like to see happen to certain criminals, I would not be surprised if that needle just occasionally in the course of my contemplations maybe even swung as far as death penalty. Maybe not quite that far for all the well-rehearsed reasons, but the level of visceral disgust which quickly becomes anger that I felt when reading about this case and this poor girl was extraordinary. Some of the details were heartbreaking. I don't know how relevant it is, the question of whether you currently have teenage children, teenage daughters, teenage sons or not. I don't know how relevant it is, but I think it probably hits you a little differently, doesn't it? When you are dealing daily with teenage issues than it would do if you were not. And some of the detail about how lonely she was and how rarely she left the house, and you have that sense, that little knowledge that she must have felt, real hope and excitement that she was making some friends. And the way her mother talked about it, I don't know if you heard her mother and father talking on the court steps, and the way they spoke about her courage and her bravery. She just sounded like such a lovely, lovely person. And all of that contributes to a sense of, as I've said, disgust and anger. But then you have to catch yourself and you have to ask, why do I want them to be named? And the reason why I want them to be named is because I want them to suffer more than they are already. And I think that's why I mentioned already the reference to the fact that they showed no remorse in the doc, because you're thinking already they are not suffering enough. But what is Mrs. Justice Yip's job today? Is it to feed our appetite for pain? We want them to have pain inflicted upon them. Or does she have a different job? I hope some lawyers will call me on this, maybe even a judge or two, who knows. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Because I'm not sure that I think these are among our ugliest appetites. You could persuade me that I'm wrong on this, but I don't like the way this case makes me feel. I don't like the way that I find myself baying for the blood, the metaphorical blood, of two teenagers who've done a disgusting and unbelievable thing. I don't like the fact that whoever the humans may be, however depraved they may be, however disgusting their acts may be, however inhuman they may seem to be, I don't like the way they make me feel. I don't like this gnawing tension in my tummy, this incoherent disgust. I don't like it. And I'm not sure it's the judge's job to feed it. And then I'd throw in another element of this conversation as well, which is their families have done nothing. Their families have done nothing wrong. In fact, another line of the coverage that jumped out at me was the reaction of the mother of the male killer, breaking down in uncontrollable sobs. Now, do you have any sympathy for her? No, of course I don't. Well, why not? What has she done wrong? If you want to buy a ticket for you should know exactly what your teenage children are up to at all times, up to and including their actions on technology that you don't even know about, let alone understand, then I think you've I think you've probably joined the wrong queue. So Nick took a great call earlier from a woman who explained her support for the idea of not naming these killers, because then we just remember Brianna's name. And we can honour it. We can honour her memory. But I don't know. Maybe there's a reason for naming them that is not simply feeding our worst impulses, our atavistic impulses, to see people who have hurt people get hurt, to see people who have done a disgusting thing have something horrible done to them. Maybe it doesn't even matter much. I mean, how much does it hurt them? Because if you're even, oh crikey, there's a complication. So if your motivation is what I think mine is, if I were to be calling now for them to be named, my motivation is that it will hurt them, and I want them to be hurt. What if it didn't? What if it had the opposite effect? You know, I think Ian Brady, possibly even Myra Hindley, revelled in their notoriety. If you never knew their names, would they have actually have been punished more effectively? You hear about serial killers getting letters off lonely women, don't you? Male serial killers getting letters off lonely women. I think one or two of them may even have married people that they met via letters and communications after they'd been jailed for atrocious murders. So why would we name these children? Why? 0345 6060 973. That's the question. I think I'm a bit guilty this morning of trying. I just realised as I get to the end of this introduction, I'm kind of having my case and eating it. I'm having a phone-in built upon the idea that it's probably not right to name them, but I've nailed my colours to the mast, at least emotionally, of wanting to hurt them. But what if naming them doesn't hurt them? So, depending on how clever you're feeling, you can tell me what you think Mrs. Justice Yip's job is this morning on 0345 6060 973. What is her job this morning? We're living in a curious period where politicians from the right of the political spectrum are increasingly bold in their condemnation of judges who hand down objective verdicts that they, the right-wing politicians, do not like. Seeing it on both sides of the Atlantic, actually. Although, of course, given the way in which judges are appointed in America, certainly to the Supreme Court, it becomes a slightly different story. But what is her job today? And I'll leave you with a question from Helen. And I want you to focus on the word good in this question that Helen has just texted to 84850. James, she writes, simply, what good will knowing the names do? What good would that do? Go on, have a crack at that. 0345 6060 973. It's 10:16. It's 10:18. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the question sort of just evolved slightly, didn't it, at the end there, from should they be named, right through to what good would it do? And you might actually have a fairly straightforward answer to the first question and no answer at all to the second one. If you're just tuning in, we're speaking of the teenagers who murdered the schoolgirl Brianna Ghey, stabbed to death, and both found guilty yesterday. Warwick is in Eastbourne, which is geographically incorrect, but that's not the point. Warwick, what would you like to say?
Hello, really good to talk to you again, James. And sorry it's under such awful circumstances.
Carry on. Likewise.
With the case of Thompson and Venables, I think their argument to be made is because they were so young.
Yes.
10 and 11 is at an age where we can almost pretend that you could take that action without really feeling
I
the...
don't know if you're even pretending. You could make a compelling case for saying they were not responsible for what they did somehow.
Exactly. But with this, 15 and 16 is at an age, politically motivated and hyped up or not, you're killing another person, and that needs to be treated with a level of reverence, which they haven't.
Well, but the law puts that age in place, and they are under that bar. So you might feel that the bar is in the wrong place. In fact, you obviously feel that.
So the difference here
yes.
is what I would say is what they've done is premeditated, and they've planned. This isn't something acted out of anger, spur of the moment, a mistake. And this should colour the rest of their lives. It should haunt them.
Well, they're going to be in jail for most of the rest of their lives, so that's
certainly
going to be
coloured. And I hope they get rehabilitated. I hope in 10 years' time we hear about
ask you Helen's
how
question.
sorry they are.
What good would it do to name them?
Not a lot. It makes us feel better.
Does it?
And
what about when they become sort of macabre celebrities, or what if they're a copycat?
Doesn't that happen anyway?
Okay, well, not if you don't know their name.
I guess, yeah, it's harder to put like a specific, like, but that feeling is still there. Like, it might not have a name, but it's almost better to have the names because they are easier to take down. They are people.
But you wanted them to be rehabilitated a minute ago.
Yeah, but I still want their crime to be treated badly.
Well, that's a life sentence in jail. I think unintentionally, and I don't mean this in a condescending way, but unintentionally, you've just highlighted perfectly the difference between the heart and the head. So your heart is going, name them, shame them, stick them in stocks and let us all throw stuff at them. But your head is going, I think that's more about me than them. I think that's more about making me feel a bit better than it is about actually seeing justice be served. And I do. I really do think some of these other factors are important. The idea of celebrity, what you really want to be able to do is read the killer's minds and do the opposite of what they would prefer. So if I could prove to you that they wanted to be named, I think under your own explanations there, Warwick, you would have to be in favour of not naming them. So if you could read their minds, establish beyond any doubt whatsoever what they actually wanted, and then you'd probably want the judge to do the opposite. But that doesn't involve the judge doing her job either. Jess is in Lewis. Jess, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Thank you for taking my call. I don't think they should be named.
Why not?
Because it won't make anyone, it won't do any good, it won't make anyone feel any better. And I think for wanting them to be named, it kind of calls out to the salacious reality TV part of our brains that we all have.
Or pantomime, sort of, boo, hiss type of territory.
Which isn't necessarily great. And essentially we have to remember that they are children. And for whatever reason we do not know and probably never will, we don't know what's happened in their lives to make their neuro pathways come to this awful conclusion.
No, I've read some fascinating research into the sort of sliding doors moment in tragedy, in atrocity, where if two people had never met, then they would not have embarked upon. I think they might even be called the Bonnie and Clyde theory. I'm not sure, but you're right. We will never know. And the question of what good it would do is probably the one that's hardest to answer in the affirmative, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't see that it would actually do any good. I'm sure the parents know their names. They have a right to know their names.
Everyone in the area knows. So I wonder if there's a logistical argument. Everyone in the area will know their names. Everyone at their schools. It would probably be very difficult
for their names to be kept secret forever.
Well, they're probably already out there, I'm sure, if you went into the furthest reaches of Twitter. But there is actually still, even in the social media age, there's a difference between something being officially known and not being officially known.
I just think essentially we have to sort of remember that they are children. They have committed a horrific crime, but they are children. So, and
therefore they should be treated differently from adults.
Yeah.
Doesn't get any simpler than that. That's what the law. I mean, the law doesn't insist upon that, but that is why the judge has the decision to take this morning that the judge has to take this morning. Thank you, Jess. 10:24 is the time. Extraordinary detail that emerged. The girl in the case, Girl X, as she is currently known, although that may have changed by the end of this programme, tried to cover her tracks by sending text messages to her victim's phone and writing a social media post in which she described Brianna as one of the best people she had ever met. And when her mother rang the police to inform them that Girl X had been with Brianna on the day of the murder, she told officers that Brianna had gone off to meet a boy in Manchester and later warned boy Y to corroborate her story. Both defendants were arrested at their homes about an hour and a half later. Jonathan's in Leon in France. Jonathan, Leon, not Leon.
No, Leon.
It is Leon. I'm just marvelling at the spelling in front of me here. Okay, what would you? It's not the most important issue before us this morning.
Nice to speak to you again, James. Unfortunately, very sad circumstances. But while it's on my mind, folie à deux is
yes, that's
what
it.
you were
Yes,
searching
yes,
for the name of if a crime that probably wouldn't have happened had the two worst people not encountered one another. I agree.
Have you written about it?
Exactly, yeah. I wrote a novel, but a very much research novel called Boy A, which is about this very, very subject. Which was about someone trying to rehabilitate themselves, having committed a horrific crime as a child, and then being released as an adult. And in that novel, they had a very, very high profile. And had been named and photos released of them as a child, and it was really trying to imagine what it would be like if someone genuinely had. It seems impossible for us to think of this now for these two individuals that somewhere down the line, and as you say, because they're 15, they're quite close to the brink of adulthood. It's very likely they're going to get extremely long sentences. I mean, I don't think it's probably going to be 15 years before. So
people may have seen this. Your story was filmed, wasn't it, with Andrew Garfield?
Yes. I mean, I think it touched a nerve, particularly in the UK, because we have this history of the killers of James Bolger,
yes.
And in a way that's part of it as well. I wish we could only remember the names of James Bolger, like
yes.
you. I remember John Venables and Robert Thompson. It would be nice in a way if we didn't know those names, if we only knew James's name, and if we look at those two individuals. One of them, Robert Thompson, seemingly has managed to rehabilitate himself, or being rehabilitated. As far as we know, he lives a very normal, in as much as I'm sure he has massive psychiatric problems from what he's done and what he's been through. But John Venables seemingly is incapable of moving on and is trapped in that moment. I don't know enough about his situation to know whether is he just pure evil, or or is he trapped forever in the moment of his most heinous act?
Yeah.
And as you said before, neither of them could have been described to have had idyllic childhoods, but had they not met each other, would that have occurred at all? But coming back to your central premise, is there any good coming from naming them? I don't think there is. I think they will get a form of macabre celebrity, and will perhaps even encourage other people to do it who are seeking that sort of celebrity in the age we live in.
They were in that culture themselves, weren't they, as we discovered during the trial, is that they revered killers. They revered committers of atrocities. So, in their own minds, it's not far from impossible that they would see themselves joining some sort of twisted pantheon. Yes?
Yeah, exactly. I do wonder about that, and I do wonder about, as with all of these sort of school shooters in America, how many of them, obviously they've got psychological problems, and obviously they hate a lot of people at their school, but it is part of it also the desire to go down in history, even if it's for an awful
disgusting.
reason.
And you know, that can change as well with passing time. As you contemplate the length of your sentence, perhaps the appeal of some sort of macabre celebrity would increase rather than decrease, because you realise that your incarceration has quite correctly robbed you of everything else by way of ambition or achievement. Is there any positive to it? Is there any reason for doing it that doesn't just feel atavistic or vengeful, that actually has? I suppose I've said that if you could read their minds, find out what they wanted, and then do the opposite, it would quiet some of the concerns. But if you could find out what Brianna's family would want, or even in a hypothetical universe, what she herself would have preferred, is there any circumstance in which it would be a positive? It would be the right thing to do for you?
Well, as you say, I can only think that Brianna's family wouldn't want that, but I can't put myself in their position entirely. But if I were them, I would think that I wouldn't want the name of my daughter to be sullied, by being forever associated with the people who murdered her.
No,
I can't really think of a positive. As you say, there may be a brief moment of positivity if it's not what the killers wanted, but ultimately they may gain from that because other people will write to them in prison. They will, that horrific celebrity might give them moments of joy in their life that would otherwise be missing, which is maybe, as I say, the best we can hope. However unlikely that seems at the moment, is that one day they can be rehabilitated and can face the enormity of what they've done. And as you say, we can't, looking at them in court and saying they were unmoved. We can't know whether they were
too
unmoved.
much into that, but you can have an emotional response to it yourself. Also, the father of Brianna, Peter Spooner, the judge making the point that they were from well-educated and intelligent, stable backgrounds. Neither had been in trouble with the police previously. The testimony from Mum and Dad after the verdict was delivered was almost unbearable, actually. Jonathan, thank you. If you're intrigued by the book Jonathan mentioned, and indeed the book Jonathan wrote, Boyer, his surname, I should tell you, is Trigell. And the film, for fans of trivia, the film is quite interesting because it's got Sean Evans in it before he was Endeavour in Morse, in the Morse origin story. The time now is 10:32, and Thomas Watts has your headlines. 10:35 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where Mrs. Justice Yip's dilemma this morning, and perhaps for a High Court judge it will not be a dilemma. Perhaps the precedent is clear. Perhaps her reasoning is clear, and she already knows whether she is going to name the teenage killers of Brianna Ghey or not. But I don't think I'd find the job particularly easy. 10:35 is the time. What would you do? What do you want to happen, and why? And nobody really so far, although I think we all feel it, but nobody really so far has answered Helen's question of what good would it do. Mike's in Widnes, not far from where this terrible crime took place, of course. Mike, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
I have a bit of a vested interest in this because I actually have a transgender daughter.
Okay.
She came out as trans in her teens and was mercilessly bullied all the way up to trying to go to university, to the point she actually dropped out of university.
I'm sorry.
She became agoraphobic. She has panic attacks and she has high anxiety. Now, she's in her mid-30s, and we're only just getting to that point of trying to steer her life right again.
Yes.
So my issue is, this killing, from what I can see, was actually based on the fact that Brianna was actually transgender as well.
I don't know that that's true.
There was some of the reports I actually read from the lad who said he really didn't like it because of the transgender.
But they'd also discussed quite a few other potential targets as well. So I
believe so. I believe so. Yeah.
So it's a little bit more nuanced than perhaps you allowed in how you described it. But this isn't the central point.
Yeah, but there was also a case of they manipulated Brianna.
Yes.
They premeditated this. They went out to actually do this, knowing what was going on, and then try to cover it up later on.
Yes.
Okay, everybody's saying they're children, and they were 15 stroke 16 years of age, and we all understand responsibility and all the rest of it. Now, my initial response when I first started to hear this was they should be named, because for me, why should they get away with having normalised lives once they come out of prison when everybody else who they've hurt don't get to do that? But listening to the conversation, I've actually given it a bit more of a rethink.
Yeah.
Now, if someone was to say to me, they were going to get put in prison and you're going to throw away the key so they will never see daylight again, then don't name them.
Sure.
Don't name them. Don't give them the anonymity of having, the ability of having been thought of by the weird sickos out there as being great and wonderful and all the rest of it.
Yes.
So, throw the key away, put them in prison, never see daylight again. Fine, I haven't got a problem with that. But once they step out that door, I'm sorry, they should be named. They should be named. People should know what these people did.
But they wouldn't, would they?
But
they wouldn't, because they'd have false identities anyway, like Thompson and Venables have.
But why should they? Why should they be given this?
I'm just pointing out that the option you're picking isn't actually on the table, Mike.
I understand that. I understand that. But what I'm saying is, why are they given all this help and all these benefits for committing the most heinous crime?
Because they're children, because they're treated differently from adults. That's the answer to your question.
Yeah, to a point. But we're saying the children. I'm sorry, 15, 16. 16 years of age.
You can argue about where the line should be, but you can't argue about what the line means.
I understand the law. I understand what the law is saying. The law is saying they're children, blah, blah, blah. It didn't happen with Venerables. No, I know.
No, that's why it's in the judge's gift. It is in the judge's gift. It's right now. The judge is she's probably already been decided. I'd be very worried if she was listening to this before making up her mind, Mike. But strange.
I understand. Yes, we'll probably you put the phone down. We'll probably find out she's either done it or not.
Well, there is that possibility. But
for me, it's a case of. For me, it's a simple case of.
They will come out one day, and therefore they should.
Come out one day.
And this would not having their names in the public domain would mean they come out with the slate wiped clean.
Exactly, and for me that it doesn't sit right. It really doesn't sit right.
With our feelings, it doesn't sit right with our feelings. But what good would it do?
Because my daughter, when she went through everything she went through, she was mercilessly bullied. She was attacked.
I'm sorry.
She was attacked on trains going to Manchester. All those people that did that got to go and live their lives normally. Yeah. They got to carry on like nothing had happened, but my daughter then had to live with the consequences of their actions. Now, Brianna's gone. You know, she's gone. We can't bring her back. But everybody around her friends, her colleagues, teachers, everybody's got to live with the actions of these people. But these people will get to just carry on with their lives. So for me, that's where it hurts.
Okay. I mean, they are going to be in jail for a very, very long time. But
I certainly hope so. I certainly hope so
as well.
What scares me, though, is the way our justice system is. They might just get life. They might just get 15 years and be out in 8. You never know. I'm hoping.
That's highly and that's another reason to name them. Although the newspapers generally in these sort of fields are one step ahead of the authorities, you feel society would have a right to know when they were being released. And Brianna's family would have, at the very least, a right to know when they were being released. It's a powerful contribution, Mike. Your pendulum, like mine, has swung a bit this morning, but ended up for now in a slightly different place. To pick up on the point about Brianna's trans identity, the fact that she was a trans girl. Emma, who, as you know, often helps me out on issues like this and has been of enormous aid to me over the years. Emma writes, I see it this way. Brianna was targeted because she was vulnerable, and she was especially vulnerable because she was trans. And society has decided that is a villainous, disposable demographic. We were, of course, talking earlier this week about Kemi Badenoch and other members of government who have a problem with Brianna using the pronouns that she chose to use in life. I presume not even they would have a problem with her being afforded the simple dignity of choosing her own pronouns in death, although there are a few people in my inbox this morning who do have a problem with her being afforded the name and the pronouns under which she was living, with which she was living, which she felt were her essence at the point of her death. It's far too serious a subject, and you're far too disgusting a human to be put in idiot's corner. It wouldn't be fair on all the idiots. 10:42 is the time. Stephen's in Dumfries. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. Thanks for taking my call.
Very welcome.
I think your question was, what's the judge's job today?
That was one of them. You know what my introductions are like. I probably asked 13 by the time I'd finished.
Yes. There's a number of questions,
yes.
All floating around this. None of them easy, to be honest.
No.
Simply, the judge's job is to dispense justice. That is her job, and the justice will be laid out by the law.
Yes.
It's a very cold and dispassionate point of view, I suppose.
Not really, but it's not binary. It's not obvious what that is. So that's why we have judges. You know, it's not like you can just punch all the data into a computer and it will churn out at the end the right thing to do. A different judge on a different day might end up at making a different decision.
Indeed, it'll be a personal thing. It'll depend on many value judgments that the judge has in her own personal life. Yes. I'm sure. But I've just sort of it always triggers me slightly. This kind of story, this kind of question.
Yes.
And the other question that you did. That you also concentrated on, what good would it do? It was somebody else's question, in fact, this one.
Yes.
What good would it do? But there's been an effect in Britain that I've noticed in my lifetime.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, we had post-Second World War. I wasn't alive during the Second World War, by the way. But post-Second World War, we still lived in this sort of era of the British stiff upper lip, of holding in the emotions, etc., etc. We were seen as sort of cold and dispassionate people. That has changed. I mentioned to your researcher, producer. I first noticed it at Princess Diana's death, which it surprised me, the complete emotional outpouring of grief at a girl who had
most people had no personal connection with whatsoever. We are going to run out of time. And are you saying that's a good thing, a bad thing, or just a thing?
In this particular case, I'm not sure that it's relevant. I have seen a shift towards emotional reactions to these kind of events. I
don't know. I think that Mary Bell's killings prompted a very from what I've read about them, the public reaction and the media frenzy would have been comparable, I think, in that one.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, I'm sure there have been cases in the past. But at the end of the day, when the judge pronounces a sentence, and whether she decides to name them or not, the purpose of dispensing justice has to somehow follow the law, and also it should somehow, I don't wish to sound like a weeping...
No, you won't. Don't worry.
But rehabilitation has to be part of any criminal sentence.
And the more committed you are to the idea that the judge should be motivated solely by hurting these culprits, the further away you are drifting from any recognition of the importance of rehabilitation, which some people reject. You don't sound like a bleeding heart liberal or a weeping angel or whatever it was. That's a character out of Doctor Who, so I don't think that was what you were reaching for. I think that is the point. Some people reject entirely the notion of rehabilitation. It's why conversations about the existence of evil are often held in this space. Mary Bell, for people who don't know, was 11 when she killed two boys, Martin Brown and Brian Howe, and she was 23 when she was released from custody. A lifelong court order granted her anonymity, which has since been extended to protect the identity of her daughter and granddaughters. But, you know, it's not watertight, and as a consequence of that, she's since lived under a series of pseudonyms. So there are precedents in both directions, but James Bulger's killers, we know their names. We know Mary Bell's name as well, actually, don't we? But we don't know where she is, and we don't know what name she's living under now. 10:46 is the time. Time is 10:49. I'm minded to return to the case of Brianna Ghey after 11 o'clock. I am at the moment, but you know me, I reserve the right to change my mind at any moment. But there's something else I want to do now, not least because hardly anybody else is doing it, with a couple of exceptions that we may touch upon shortly. But I refer, of course, to that verdict last week, or the week before, last week, the Mirror Group newspapers over the phone hacking and other unlawful information gathering. I'm going to remind you of what Piers Morgan, some of what Piers Morgan had to say in the aftermath of the judge in that case finding that he had indeed known about phone hacking. And then I'm delighted to tell you that Evan Harris, who is the legal analyst who helped some of the claimants in this, all of the claimants in this case, will talk us through elements of that statement and elements of that judgment. So here's a little clip of that statement.
Today, a judge in the High Court in London has ruled on various cases, including Prince Harry's claim against Mirror Group newspapers, where I was an editor until 2004. The judgment finds there is just one article relating to the Prince, published in the Daily Mirror during my entire 9-year tenure as editor, that he thinks may have involved some unlawful information gathering. To be clear, I had then, and still have, zero knowledge of how that particular story was gathered. All his other claims against the Daily Mirror, under my editorship, were rejected. With regard to the judge's other references to me in his judgment, I also want to reiterate, as I've consistently said for many years now, I've never hacked a phone or told anybody else to hack a phone. And nobody has produced any actual evidence to prove that I did. I wasn't called as a witness, and it's important for people to know this, by either side in the case, nor was I asked to provide any statement. I would have very happily agreed to do either or both of those things had I been asked. Nor did I have a single conversation with any of the Mirror Group lawyers throughout the entire legal process. So, I wasn't able to respond to the many false allegations that were spewed about me in court by all foes of mine with an axe to grind, most of which, inexplicably, were not even challenged in my absence by the Mirror Group counsel. But I note the judge appears to have believed the evidence of Omid Scobie, who lied about me in his new book, and he lied about me in court, and the whole world now knows him to be a deluded fantasist. And he believed the evidence of Alistair Campbell, another proven liar who spun this country into an illegal war.
For the record, Piers Morgan lied about me in his last book, but that's not an element is of interest in these matters. Dr. Evan Harris is here, legal analyst to the claimants in the case. So we'll start with the first line there. The judgment finds there is just one article relating to the Prince published in the Daily Mirror during my entire 9-year tenure as editor that he thinks may have involved some unlawful information gathering.
And that all other articles from his editorship were rejected. Well, that's false. I mean, you could say it's just wrong, because not everything that you write in a book or say that is wrong is a lie, and that's where he goes wrong with Omid Scobie, or people go wrong with what's said in books. A source may tell you something, you report it, it's contested. A lie is when you know, and it's shown that you know. Now, he definitely knows that of the 148 articles that are in that claim, only 33, a sample, were taken by the judge and determined, which means, and even he can do this maths, I think, 115 have not been determined. Of those 115, 19 are from his time as editor of the Daily Mail, in the Daily Mail. So what we know is that there's one found, 19 up for grabs. So it's simply not true, and all he's doing is misleading and spinning, and he knows, because he will have read the judgment, and he knows this, but he's just trying to make his outrage, his faux outrage, the story, and he did that quite effectively for his audience, which was the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail and his sort of snowflake Twitter sphere, which he speaks to, and
so what all you could say with accuracy is that there remain well over 100 articles in this case alone upon which the judge is yet to rule.
Oh yes, of which 19 are during.
Of which 19 are during, so over 10% are during my.
Yes,
close to 20% are during
and of course,
my editorship.
There have been hundreds of other claimants, all with articles in his editorship period, all of whom, every single one of them, the Mirror has paid out with admissions that they were the product of phone hacking or unlawful information gathering. Hundreds. Nigel Havers famously, the Daily Mirror, and Nigel Havers says, I can't believe Piers Morgan was hacking the phone of my wife as she was dying of cancer. So, it's very clear that this one article was not an isolated case, and the judge made that point.
All his other claims against the Daily Mirror under my editorship were rejected.
Well, as I say, there's 19 that haven't been considered.
With regard to the judge's other references to me and his judgment, I also want to reiterate, as I've consistently said for many years now, I've never hacked a phone.
And I've never instructed anyone to hack a phone. Well, that's not consistently what he said, because what he's consistently said in the past is that he never knowingly published an article that came from phone hacking. Now, he has dropped that last part of his multiple protestations of innocence.
And of course, it's not what the judge in this case was describing him.
What the judge found was this latter point, was that he must have known. He says it's clear, it's obvious, it's without doubt, in fact. So it's not a civil level of proof of balance of probabilities more likely than not. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. It's obvious, there is no doubt that those editors, including him, knew about it. Now, what he said previously is, I haven't hacked a phone, I've never instructed anyone to hack a phone. Well, how would you ever find proof of that unless, someone's videoing him in the office? And that doesn't exist because they covered their tracks. But what he used to say, and indeed what he said at Leveson, 100% sure, he said, that he never published an article that was the product of this sort of activity. And the judge has said, specifying instances like Ulrika Johnson and so forth, that were clearly, he said, from this, and he must have known about it. Because I've made this point before, if you don't know the source of your scoops, you must be the worst editor to have haunted the Fleet Street, or indeed any newsroom in the world, or you're involved in this criminal activity. There's only two choices, and the judge has found that he wasn't the worst editor. He knew, and that brings him, implies knowledge of criminal activity for which he's responsible, and you can't escape from the fact that what he said at Leveson was not true, and the judge says he knew it wasn't true.
Which of the cases the judge cited do you think were the most damning to this attempted defence?
The case of Melanie Cantor.
It is Melanie Cantor, who was Ulrika Johnson's agent.
It's a very good one because he made part of his name was based on this thing where he says, I got this fantastic source and I put it to Melanie Cantor and she confirmed it, right?
This is about Ulrika Johnson having an unlikely
where they were hacking
affair with Sven-Göran Eriksson, who was the England manager.
They were hacking the phones, both of them, his staff, and they heard a Swedish woman on his phone. I think that's how it worked. And they got a Swedish receptionist, it is said, to translate the voicemails that they had transcribed, and they worked out what was going on. And they pretended it came from a source. They always do this. And then they got the agent under pressure to confirm it. Turns out the source was, in fact, their phones and the agent's phone, because there are invoices to a private investigator known to be found by the judge to be and admitted by Mirror Group to be associated with hacking activity in the name of Melanie Cantor, the agent, who was a witness, who Mirror Group did not contest, so she wasn't cross-examined. They accepted her evidence as truthful. I'm a friend of Piers. He was always calling me. I can't believe he did this to me. There was invoices in her name and in the name of Ulrika and in the name of Sven. By the journalist, bylined, called James Scott, who the judge labelled very clearly as a, quote, known phone hacker, who wrote the story, who bylined the story. Well, we wrote the story, and it's infamously known, Private Eye's written about this, that it was given to the 3am girls to create distance between him and the story. And in order to consolate him for losing the byline on this scoop, he was given a trip to the West Indies. It's a good gig if you can get it, obviously.
Nor have I had a single conversation with any of the Mirror Group lawyers throughout the entire legal process.
Right. So he complains that he's not been called to give evidence in his own defence. There's only two reasons, there's only two circumstances where that could happen. Only the Mirror Group could call him. Ethically, if lawyers know that a witness is not going to tell the truth, they can't really depose him and submit it, okay? So their position...
He would still insist that he would tell the truth,
indeed,
of course.
So they had the option of calling him to deny it, which would help their case enormously.
Yes.
I assume, and this is only my assumption, knowing what the rules are on lawyers, that they either couldn't bear for him to tell if he told the truth, it would wreck their case, because the truth was he was involved. And that's the last thing they want, is him being torn apart as he would be under cross-examination, where there's no escape. He can't just scurry off like he did on Good Morning Britain, or scurry back into his house like he did at that press conference, or he submits a false witness statement, and if they believe it to be false, and because they didn't challenge Melanie Cantor's evidence or Ben Wegg-Prosser's evidence, who's another person who testified to this effect, I assume they said they're truthful, right, because they're not challenging it, they couldn't depose him. Now, the judge said that the Mirror said that they were in touch with him during the litigation, and he did help them, quotes, help them. So either the Mirror lawyers have misled the judge, or it maybe wasn't a lawyer that was in touch with him. Maybe it was an old mate who said he was working with the lawyers, and he's dissembling. Everything he said in that statement was incredibly slippery.
And indeed, speaking of old mates, he very much gave the impression that the only people who'd given evidence against him were old foes, citing Alistair Campbell and Omid Scobie. But you've just said Melanie Cantor was an old friend of his. Who's David Seymour?
David Seymour was the long-standing political editor of the Mirror Group, worked closely with Piers Morgan. When we approached him to be a witness, he said he didn't have a beef, particularly a personal beef with Piers Morgan, but knew him, and his evidence was that he was a slippery character, and he gave an example of how he came out singing a Beatles song that he said he'd heard on a voicemail left by Paul McCartney for Heather Mills when they were having a row. And David's evidence was he later found out that voicemail had been given to him by the editor of The People at the time, which was Neil Wallace, who later on became Andy Coulson's deputy and denied knowing anything about this. The judge found that the editor of The People at that time knew about it, and that has huge implications for what Mr. Wallace said in his criminal trial, where he denied knowing about it later at the News of the World.
So
but there's one other point I want to make about Omid Scobie. He said, how can he believe him because he doesn't like him and he doesn't believe what he's written in his book? What a judge does is watch a person give evidence under cross-examination by a King's Counsel. And he was thoroughly cross-examined by the King's Counsel and for Mirror Group. And the judge said he struck me as an honest and straightforward witness. And what he said matched the documents, that there was an article. So Omid Scobie said he'd overheard Piers Morgan at the 3 a.m. desk where he was interning saying, where'd you get this story about Kylie Minogue and James Gooding from? From the voicemails, Piers, says the person. And sure enough, there's an article. And there's a payment to a private investigator that is said to be found to be preparatory to hacking. So there's nothing in this statement that is credible from Piers Morgan, and it's all bluster.
I'm grateful to you for providing a little bit more insight into this judgment and indeed this developing case. How depressing is it for you and your colleagues at Byline Times? And I know David Yellen does a podcast on BBC Sounds that has dug into it a little further. If this featured somebody who wasn't so closely allied with the Fleet Street establishment, it's fair to say it would be getting rather more coverage. Or indeed, if it wasn't largely about the Fleet Street establishment.
If you look at the Telegraph, for example, they don't lead on Harry wins on their website. No. It's Piers Morgan rejects allegations.
Yes.
And that's not the same for all of Fleet Street. And the Times, for the first time in this litigation, to be fair, ran a relatively straight story, right? And the comments underneath, which I read for interest, never engage with, were very pro-Harry, which you don't normally get because the Times readership is different. That there were some straight stories, a PA report in the Mail, but their readership has long gone, long since sailed off the abyss of sanity and reasonableness. So, but it is problematic that you have a newspaper industry in this country, and David Yellen made this point very well, that will not report the news when it's about them. If it's any other industry, they are demanding heads roll. Right, when it happened when something happened to Philip Schofield and Hugh Edwards, not criminal offences, not judgments, they must be taken off air. They must be suspended by ITV and BBC respectively, and they were. So, as I've said before, Piers Morgan should be called in by his head of news at Talk TV and suspended, and then that head of news at Talk TV, Richard Wallace, the former editor of the Daily Mirror, should then suspend himself for exactly the same finding that the judge made. But they won't, because these right-wing talk show characters, it's always about the other people they want to cancel, never themselves.
Evan Harris, you've taken us 5 minutes past the allotted time for the news, which is a testament to how hard I was hanging on your every word. Many thanks.
Very kind. Thank you, James.
Well, we'll be seeing you again. It's just coming up to 11:05. It is 8 minutes after 11, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm going to play you the statements from the mother and father of Brianna Ghey in full. It will probably take us pretty much up to the next break, and then we'll return to the conversation of whether her killers should be named, because I think my more primitive responses to the story were formed in large part while listening to this incredibly harrowing. I don't know if this constitutes a trigger warning or not, but it's deeply upsetting. It's not detailed, but it's heartbreaking. Brianna's mother is called Esther Ghey and her father Peter Spooner. Those are the voices you're about to hear.
Brianna was larger than life. She was funny, witty and fearless. We miss Brianna so much, and our house feels empty without her laughter. To know how scared my usually fearless child must have been when she was alone in that park with someone that she called her friend will haunt me forever. Prior to the trial, I had moments where I felt sorry for the defendants because they had ruined their own lives as well as ours. But now, knowing the true nature and seeing the remorse for what they have done to Brianna, I have lost all sympathy that I may have previously had for them. And I am glad that they will spend many years in prison and away from society. I would like to take this opportunity to give my thanks to all involved in the outcome today. Thank you to Cheshire Police and the CPS for all of the hard work that has gone into building this case following a thorough investigation led by DCI Adam Waller and DI Nigel Parr. Thank you to our liaison officers, DC Sarah Newton and DC Linda Turtle, for supporting us throughout the investigation and trial with such professionalism and kindness. Thank you to Justice Yip for ensuring a fair trial has been carried out for all. Thank you to the prosecution, Deanna Hare, Casey and her team for all of the hard work throughout and for advocating for Brianna in such an outstanding way. Thank you also to the jury for making the right decision based on the evidence. I understand how difficult this must have been for you all, but you have worked hard, and thanks to you, society is now a safer place. Thank you to all of those who gave evidence, with special thanks to the couple who found Brianna and PC Chadwick, the first officer on the scene. I'm so grateful that in the last moments of her life, she had the concern and kindness from you all, and I undoubtedly know that you did all you could do to help my precious child. Thank you to the majority of the press who have reported sensitively throughout. This has meant a lot to our family and Brianna's friends. Lastly, please have some empathy and compassion for the families of the young people convicted of this horrific crime. They too have lost a child, and they must live the rest of their lives knowing what their child has done. My family and I request some healing space for the next few weeks. However, I will be back at the end of January to continue my campaigning for better mental health support for young people and their families. Thank you.
I never stopped loving her, and I never will. From when she was little, I remember the faces she would pull to make me laugh, a cheeky giggle, funny dances are engraved in my memory. I knew she was going to be a star, and the amount of support she received from the followers on TikTok proved this. She shared her TikTok videos with me all the time, and I was so proud of what she could do. She showed me how she would do her makeup. She had such an amazing talent, and I enjoyed sharing this with family and friends. I look into her eyes and they shine back at me. And I know she was a beautiful girl to be proud of. I hate how her life has been brutally taken away from her. and she's been deprived of the life she wanted to live. It's difficult to comprehend how some people can do these vile things in the world and don't understand how cruel and heartbreaking their actions can be. The impact on Brianna's death has not just affected me as her father, but also my whole family. My heart bleeds every day for Brianna, and this will never go away. And the amount of guilt I have can sometimes be unbearable. But I will ensure her memory lives on in my thoughts and dreams. The support I've received from my fiancée Lorraine, family and friends has been second to none, and without you I wouldn't have got through it. Also, the amount of work and effort the police have put into getting Brianna the justice she deserves has not gone unnoticed. Mr. Parr and all the family liaison officers has been extremely supportive through the whole process and understood the emotional journey that has been experienced. I also want to express my gratitude to PC Andrew Chadwick and the paramedics who tried all they could to try and save my daughter. We spoke a few days before she was taken from me, and we were arranging to meet each other. It breaks me every day to know I'll never get that chance again. I wish I had been there to protect her, but that's something I must live with. The suffering from this horrific incident should never happen, and I hope no other family ever experience the torture this can bring.
The mother and father there of the murdered schoolgirl Brianna Ghey. I'm going to add one more statement to that you may not have come across previously. Esther Ghey and Peter Spooner speaking. This is Emma Mills, who is the head teacher at Birchwood Community High School, where Brianna was attending. And it's actually quite remarkable for a variety of reasons that you'll soon appreciate. Losing Brianna has been heartbreaking. She was a creative, witty young lady who was robbed of the chance to overcome her anxieties, robbed of the chance to grow up, and robbed of the chance to fulfill her ambitions of training in hair and beauty. Her nails matching with her phone case, her fluffy handbag and coat, the over-the-knee white socks and rolled-up skirt, the amazing hair extensions and lashes that went on for days, her creativity and flair for fashion. She was iconic in her look. She had a sparkle, and you could never miss her. Once met, never forgotten. The loss of any life is awful, a child even worse. But what happened to Brianna is beyond comprehension and has changed me as a person and my outlook on life forever. Seeing people in the media talk about her being bullied is hurtful on so many levels, least of all how disrespectful this is to Brianna. She was sharp-tongued, I know, as I was on the receiving end of it many a time, had a strong sense of justice and was not afraid to say what she thought. She had very close relationships with staff due to the nature of her personalised and bespoke timetable in school. She was not in the main body of the school due to her social anxiety. She never alleged any bullying, and I would pity the person who would have tried, to be honest. My disillusionment with the tabloid press and social media has grown daily in the last 10 months, how things can be twisted, but also how lies can be told with no sense of responsibility or care for the hurt and pain it causes. It is still happening now. I realise it is a beast that can't be tamed, and that scares me. Most of all, out of everything that has happened, I have been inspired by the true force of nature that is Brianna's mum Esther. She is a dignified, strong, and a warrior mother, being there for Brianna not only when she was alive, but standing strong for her in death in a way that I am totally in awe of. She is dedicated to making a positive legacy for Brianna in helping other young people. To create something so positive out of such personal pain and tragedy is truly remarkable. She is just that, remarkable. And I'm very proud to call her my friend. I only stumbled across that in the Liverpool Echo, actually, just before coming on air. And it did occur to me that it's too early to talk about legacies at the top of the list of conversation, but there is going to be a big legacy here. I think Brianna's mother is going to make sure of that, and I wonder whether Brianna's legacy will be a slight change in the way that some people think about trans issues and transgender children, because to hear her father speaking so powerfully and so movingly about his beautiful daughter is the kind of thing that we're supposed to be getting outraged by and spooked by, and banning and cancelling, and indeed mounting Tory party leadership bids on denying people like Brianna their chosen pronouns. It may be just that the nature of social change sometimes is incremental. rather than exponential, and somehow this terrible tragedy would have turned the dial in the direction of the light. It is 20 minutes after 11. It is heartbreaking. You're absolutely right. And I'm struck that many of you hadn't heard that before. And indeed by your support for the sentiments I expressed at the end of that. Let's return to the central question, although I wonder, I can't quite calibrate the switchboard in the way that I want to for this, because I wonder whether the pendulum now swings back to wanting more pain to be delivered to the people responsible for robbing those parents, and indeed that head teacher who I thought expressed herself quite beautifully of Brianna Ghey. And that takes us back to the question of what good would it do? What good would it do to name the killers? 21 minutes after 11. Nathan is in Glasgow. Nathan, what would you like to say?
Hi there. Yeah, James, I'd be 100% hi there. I'd be 100% behind naming them. Although I do think, I think we've spoken before, you might recall my backgrounds in law enforcement, serious crime, and I've looked at individuals like this in the face
and
before.
Youth offenders as well, specifically, I think.
Yeah, I have, yeah, who you could almost track the path, and despite best intentions, and I was never one to damn somebody for
Sure.
their instant actions. There was always room for forgiveness of that, and an understanding that they had different elements of their life. But these individuals, I'd have absolutely no compunction in saying that in all likelihood they'll want to do similar or the same again, given the chance. And the public has a right to protection, which would be the primary thought in my mind, is that when they are released, and we've heard, I think, in instances referred to in your show this morning, that I think it was the woman Bell, it released at a very young age. And to have them living next door to you or round the corner, and not to know who they are.
But you wouldn't anyway. They'd be afforded new identities like Venables and Thompson were, and like Mary Bell has been.
I think
so you wouldn't know anyway.
Also,
all you do is open up the possibility of vigilantism, and then, I mean, I thought the line in the Mary Bell biography that was most interesting was perhaps she's lived under under various pseudonyms. So you can't really keep the lid on it, but you could perhaps try harder.
Well, why try harder? But I think what I would go with there is you cannot keep the lid on it, and that's a good thing. You should know, you must know whether or not things are reformed after this, so that there's some sort of Rihanna law which allows it. You will know. That's fairness to the public. It's totally skewed the wrong way. But I would say that the judge will have a great deal of information in these cases.
That's very true. And we should do well to remember that, whether we approve or disapprove of her final decision. We should remember that she has taken it with access to information the rest of us will never know about, let alone see.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, and I, for one, although I'm very strongly of the opinion that they should be named. If the judge says no, I would accept. Then she knows best.
Does age not matter at all? I mean, is there not a case because I could?
But look at Venables. They gather obscene pictures of children.
That's been reported.
They have had. Yeah, they've had every opportunity. And I imagine every assistance given to let's say, grow out of that, for want of a better expression. But they haven't. They're intrinsically evil.
But what does the fact that we know what does the fact that we know his name change? It doesn't change anything, does it?
I think it leads to the point, as you've said, where the cat's out the bag, and like it or not, naming them gives a likelihood that they'll be known from now on in, and they should carry that burden for life.
I understand that.
They should carry that burden for life.
But that's a desire for them to suffer, which I think is understandable in the circumstances.
It's a desire to prove repentance. So if you're going to get
because you began by describing people beyond repentance. You began by telling me that you've looked them in the eyes and you know that they can't be rehabilitated, and they don't, and they won't repent. So I can't let you have it both ways.
Well, those who repent should have the ability to be challenged for their prior behaviour. You can't repent. I can't remember the fellow's name now, who was a slaver back in the day, and who was it, Amistad or the Amazing Grace that came from it. He never denied his past. So you can't allow that these people can move on and pretend or live in a bubble.
And yet I come back to the point. No, I was just picking up on your use of the word burden. I don't necessarily disagree with you. I would like them to carry the heaviest burden imaginable, but I don't know whether that is feeding something a bit unpleasant in me, or whether it's serving some wider, broader purpose. Thank you. I've got quite a few other cases as well, aren't there? The Damilola Taylor's killers were named, and they were underage. So it would be, I wouldn't call it special treatment, Junior, but it would be different treatment from other infamous cases if they were not to be named. But as Nathan just reminded us, it's a decision entirely in the gift of the judge. I cried, writes Paul, hearing her parents, James, and I understand why you've put her in capital letters, Paul. I don't want to inflict pain on anyone. Thank you. John's in New Malden. John, what would you like to say?
Well, I understand about naming and everything else, but the one thing, I mean, Jamie Bolger's killers, John Venables and Robert Thompson.
Yes.
And my name is John Venables.
Crikey.
And and I'm 15 years older than him, thankfully, so
but still,
everyone knows it wasn't me. But I can guarantee the only John Venables walking around is not them, because they changed their names. You know, so by naming them, it doesn't actually mean anything.
And yet it means, I presume it means quite a lot to you.
It doesn't, because I'm 15 years old.
So it hasn't impacted on you particularly?
I've had stupid comments loads over the years.
Well, that's not diminished. Let's not diminish that, actually, John. I mean, it's your life. I can't start giving you lessons about your own life. But that must be pretty grim, though.
It's horrible being associated with something like that.
Of course.
But, you know, it just makes no sense in a way, because those two kids are not called that anymore. And say, Damo Taylor, you know, Brianna's killers are not going to be called the names they've got at the moment. So they're going to come out, and if obviously they commit further offences, they'll just be referred to as their old names.
Yes, and that's the bit where you find yourself wondering what exactly it would, what purpose it would serve, and yet they have done it in previous...
Yeah, I do think, I mean, if it serves a purpose, it's worth it.
But you need to know what the purpose is.
Yes, yeah, I mean, if there's no purpose because they're going to change the name, what's the point in naming it to start with?
Yeah, well, I tried to make that point to Nathan a moment ago, but I don't know that I made it as well as you. I mean, did you ever consider changing your name?
Oh God, no.
No.
No. No, I mean that's my name.
Could change it to Terry.
Yeah, well, I mean, I got asked if he was my uncle.
I bet you did. Well, listen, I can't give you a Ray Liotta because of the subject matter that is under discussion at the moment, but that is a fairly remarkable contribution to a conversation about
You're
whether...
welcome. Can I just also say
of course,
that
John,
I found the statements from the parents and the teacher so moving.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I really did.
Extraordinary. I'm not going to say especially one or the other, but the courage on display was quite breathtaking, and somehow they both managed to paint a picture of their daughter that almost transcended the words, and a remarkable achievement in the circumstances. Thank you, John. It's a good conversation, this. It's an interesting one. I'd just like to, because we'll carry it on for another 10 minutes or so. Then I've got quite an interesting guest for you. And then, of course, it is Thursday, so it will be Mystery Hour. But thank you for because radio funnies are a funny old thing. And I did indulge myself a bit at 10 o'clock talking about the business of having offering up opinions for a living. But this is one of the most measured, thoughtful and insightful conversations about a very, very tricky subject and a potentially quite simple question. The conversation has been anything but, and I'm very, very grateful to everyone who's contributed for that. It's coming up to 11:30. Thomas Watts has your headlines. It is 31 minutes after 11, and it is indeed in Manchester Crown Court that Mrs. Justice Yip is considering the question of whether or not to name Brianna Ghey's killers. I don't know whether you noticed this. It's actually quite extraordinary. The government announced yesterday that some of the money it, quotes, saved, end quotes, by scrapping HS2 would be spent on some roads. And they hailed it as part of the Network North transport project. They actually had Network North branding certainly on the Twitter announcement that they would be spending some of the money, quotes, saved, end quotes, by scrapping HS2 on fixing potholes and improving roads as part of the Network North project. So which part of the North do you think was in receipt of the Network North funding announced by the government yesterday? Which part of the North do you think it was? Beulah? Anyone? Let's check that, actually, that footage, and get the word. It's a genuine game. Anyone can play. Which part do you think perhaps it was Huddersfield? Or Sheffield? Cumbria, perhaps. It may have been in Keswick. Which part of... I shall... Remind me to tell you before home time, because I think you're probably going to enjoy this particular revelation. The government hailed its latest Network North transport project yesterday, and I wonder which part of the North you think got the £235 million being referred to. But back to the much more serious question of the day. I don't have the legal knowledge for the precedents, but most of the cases you can think of, infamous as they are, most of the cases you can think of, the culprits have been named. Someone sent me good, I've kept it. Ian sent me this, which speaks to quite a lot of the conversation we've been having today, although quite obliquely. 3 days after James Bulger's body was found, the then Prime Minister John Major said, "Society needs to condemn a little more and understand a little less." 5 days later, his Home Secretary, Kenneth Clarke, announced plans to incarcerate children as young as 12. Not naming the murderers makes it harder to condemn and continue to condemn again and again and again, while failing to strive to understand continues to fertilise the soil from which such atrocities arise. It's very powerfully put. Don't ring me to answer that question about Network North, by the way. It's just a bit of fun. Nick's in Newark. Back to the names. Nick, what would you like to say?
Hi there. Yes.
Is it Newark? Do you know? Has Newark got the money, do we think? No? Well,
yes,
stay tuned. Stay tuned to find out, Nick.
Yes. Firstly, please don't hold that against me.
Carry on.
As I was saying to your producer, I don't want to know their names, frankly, because it will take. I think it will take a lot away from poor Brianna.
Yes.
Because we'll be talking about them. I hope they get the help they need and the rehabilitation that, hopefully they'll get it in
that's where the Bulger case becomes so pertinent, isn't it?
Exactly.
Because one, it would seem, has turned his life around, and one has not, which is, you can use that either way, can't you? You can either use it to say rehabilitation works or rehabilitation doesn't. The point is, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
I was going to say, actually, regarding that, if you think about it, that's a 50%
success rate.
Success rate. That's quite incredible. But again, away from that, again, I almost wish we'd never known their names.
Yeah, well, I had to look up the names of Mary Bell's victims, which I think, and I wasn't alive, I don't think, when those crimes happened. But
yes, I remember the story of Mary. Of
course,
Bell.
I think Gita Serini wrote an amazing biography a few years ago, which also caused quite a lot of controversy because, of course, the argument that why are we giving so much attention to a child killer when we've forgotten the names of her victims? So it changes the story, doesn't it, to have the names out there?
Yeah, that's the reason. I mean, because the lasting image, because the first image I saw after the terrible crime was of her eating an ice cream. It might have been with a lovely smile, and also actually.
Whereas what we remember now are the mugshots of Thompson and Venables. That's the visual image that you have whenever the name of Jamie Bulger is mentioned. Him being led away on the one hand, and then the mugshots of the killers on the other. But I don't know that the judge takes stuff like that into account. Actually, I don't know that will be part of her contemplations, her pontifications. I don't know whether it even should be. 11:36 is the time. Thank you, Nick. Andrew is in Bedford. Andrew, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm from a town just outside of Liverpool, so, growing up. And, it was quite often, that on Facebook you'd see people sharing photos, probably for likes and just to go viral and stuff, of people saying that it was Robert Thompson or John Venables.
He's turned up at my local, or he's turned up working around the corner, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. This is him. this is not necessarily this is where he lives, but
sure.
Share it around so everyone's aware who it is.
Yeah.
And it turns out that it's actually no one to do with it. It's just some random guy who either someone's got an axe to grind with him or, completely unrelated to it. So I don't know if that's a case for naming them or not.
No.
But, it's just innocent people get tied up in it if they... In that case, they are named, and it's still innocent people getting tied up, but they've got new identities and stuff.
What good does it do? What good does it do? I mean, I think of Nathan's words that they should carry the heaviest burden. I can live with that. I'm comfortable with that, but not to the exclusion of the possibility of rehabilitation. What good does it do? Because it's usually happened thinking about it, thinking of Damilola Taylor, thinking of Mary Bell, thinking of Martin Brown and Brian Howe, thinking of previous cases, thinking of James Bulger. We know the names of the culprits in all of these cases, and yet I can't really think of any good that's done.
Exactly, and you know the names, but they've now got new identities. All you know is the children on the mugshots. You don't know them as adults. So is it protecting anyone once they're named and they're out and they've got new identities? I don't really know, but throughout the past nearly 2 hours, my mind's gone from one to the other to the other. Just can't nail down whether it's right or wrong. But it's just heartbreaking. But
of course it is.
You just
all
can't.
roads lead to Helen, who was the first one to ask the question. I hate it when that happens. I'm doing a 20-minute monologue and someone texts in a single line that's a considerably better question than whatever one I'm trying to work my way towards. What good would it do? Thank you, Andrew. It is just coming up to 11:40. Mystery Hour with us at 12. And I say this most weeks, but we'll be glad of the light relief, I think, although mindful, of course, of what we are being relieved from. This is one of those awful conversations, and I'm so glad that we played out the tape of Brianna's parents, because to my side, I always forget that you're not immersed necessarily quite as deeply in the news as those of us who do it for a living, but I thought they were very, very, very powerful statements, and the comments also from her headmistress really, I think, will stay with quite a lot of us for quite a long time. Mike's in Crewe. Mike, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning, James.
Hello,
Mike. First, as I was saying to your producer, I don't think it would do any good whatsoever for the judge to release the names, and mainly because the only thing that it will do, I think, is just give more opportunities for people to get on Twitter and other internet media to have a go at the parents and the family and the friends of the two offenders.
Jab, where are we? 20 to 12. We've been on since 10 o'clock and no one's really picked up on that. But it's a powerful point, isn't it? Because you paint a target on them for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely. Yeah, they've got to live with it now, just as much as Brianna's parents have as well, I think.
That's very true. And yet, in the past, most of the cases we can think of, the parents, the culprits have been named. I don't know what I'm not. Neither of us are judges, Mike, are we? So, I can't speak for you.
Going back to the Bulger case, the internet, wasn't as big, and certainly, people didn't take advantage of the internet as much in those days, I don't think.
It's very true. I wonder how big a factor it is. And that would not be fair. I mean, regardless of what the home life was like, and both culprits have been described as coming from stable backgrounds, in contrast to some of the killers in the other cases that we've been talking about today. All of the other cases that we've been talking about today, there is still an innocence attached to the parents. They did not do these crimes, and they will be haunted by them for the rest of their lives regardless. But why the public shaming, if you like? Everyone in their world will know, but if they chose to move somewhere else or they chose to start again somewhere else, then this would follow them wherever they went and forever. I'll read this from Paul, who's in Glasgow. Do you know what, James? At the beginning of this conversation, I was 100% in favour of naming them now that they've been convicted, but you and your show have actually made me look at my own opinion and ask, but why? I can only see negatives to naming them now, like possible abuse for the killer's innocent families, as Mike just picked up on, or for those unfortunate enough to share their names after hearing Brianna's mother's compassion for the killer's innocent families, and also hearing from Mr. John Venables. If you're just tuning in, it wasn't that John Venables, but that was the point. He says, I've completely 180'd, and adds, which for reasons that I won't explain, he adds, what's the point in having a mind, right? And the reason that I won't explain is that it will involve a reference to a book that I wrote, and I don't want to reference that book. I'm going to reference a different book, because I'm doing quite a lot of thank yous today. It's not the end of term. We break up tomorrow, although LBC keeping you company, of course, throughout the festive period. But I had some rather extraordinary news this week, and it is largely down to you that the champagne corks were popping last night. That my book, How They Broke Britain, has broken through the 100,000 barrier, which is a very big deal in publishing. The publishers tell me, and it's happened in under 2 months. So thank you to anyone who's helped make that possible. It's been a very happy experience, and goodness knows we need those at the moment, especially on days like today. But I will share with you now, because otherwise I'll forget. I will solve the mystery of where the £235 million of pothole money spent as part of a Network North project, announced on social media with a photograph of a worker driving a road roller, whereabouts in the north this money is set to be spent. And the answer is London. That is what the government somehow managed to do. They managed to release a picture or announcing money under the Network North banner, claiming that the scrapping of HS2 had allowed extra investment, up to £8.3 billion, of which £235 million under, by their own description, the Network North transport project would be making its way to London. Understandably, some northern political leaders were a little unhappy about this. Kim McGuinness, who's Labour's candidate to be the mayor of North East England, said the move was Tories celebrating the widening north-south divide. I've checked since we came on air this morning, and they have actually taken it down. So I think it was a cock-up rather than a clear attempt to widen the widening north-south divide. It's coming up to 11:45. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. 11:47 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Two guests in the studio today. That's almost a record. And my next guest, John Harvey, is quite hard to introduce. We are going to focus on a book that John has written as a sort of commemoration of and tribute to his late brother Dan. But as you will discover in the course of this conversation, John himself is something of a Renaissance man, or at least he has fingers in several pies. John, welcome. Why did you write A Fan for All Seasons, and what is it about?
Well, firstly, James, thanks so much for having me, and to the listeners. This book is my attempt to try and sort of put into words and crystallise the memory of my brother Dan, who was, I'm sure many listeners will have this, was one of those utter sports nuts. It completely defined him, and it defined our relationship as brothers. But he very sadly passed away 9 years ago in a completely sort of shocking moment, unexpected. He just he died, and I found him just in his flat one day. Yes. And it completely, obviously, changed my life, and I wasn't sure what to do with it.
Only 43, I think.
Yeah, it's 43. Yeah. It's the same age I am now, so it's sort of, this year's been a strange one. And he didn't leave much behind, but I inherited his Crystal Palace Football Club season tickets. Okay. That was his sort of one thing. And I'm not a Palace fan, I'm a Spurs fan. And
cruelty from beyond the grave.
Exactly, a fate worse than death, some have said to me. But I ended up following Palace, being his eyes and ears for a season at Selhurst Park. He'd had this seat for a quarter of a century, and it was a funny old season when they got to the cup final against United. Yes. Managed to snatch defeat from victory, just like they had done in 1990 when he started supporting them properly. Gosh. And it was a sort of weird roller coaster moment. And then that was one thing. But then I was like, what do I do next? I'm sure, again, listeners have got this feeling of how do you try and keep the memory of someone alive? How do you keep the flame burning? I thought, well, I could keep doing it, but then that would be living his life, not mine. So instead, I sort of accidentally hatched this plan to spend the money on Dan's seat. I gave it up, but spent the money on, in 1 year, trying to see as many of the great sporting events as we loved in a single season as I could, to create the ultimate season ticket. So this book is me going from everything from Wimbledon tennis to Wimbledon greyhounds, rugby to Rubik's Cubes, World Championships, you name it, that's what I went to.
Frimley Green, don't forget Frimley Green. What did you get out of it?
Well, a lot more than I was expecting, because like I say, I stumbled into it. I didn't expect to do it, let alone write a book about it. And I suppose to start with, it was coping. I think we all need that. Grief is obviously something that strikes us all. and at times often when we're least expecting it. And to have something that you can turn to is, I think, just the absolute crucial way of handling grief and mourning. And for us, sport was that thing which enabled me to not just focus on the death, but to celebrate his life, because sport is that strange thing that keeps turning. You were just saying off air, you're a Kidderminster Harriers fan, and it no matter what happens to football clubs or anything, we're just part of the journey, and yet the sort of story of sport carries on. And so I plugged into something bigger.
I love that, because it's transcendental, isn't it? And it is quite hard to explain, because people who are initiated just know, even though they can't articulate it, and people who are not initiated don't understand any of it. They think we're all mad, or in a sense, all sports are stupid. And yet, the level of passion that we feel, or the level of commitment that we feel, in the case of people like Dan, and to a lesser extent to you, you're less of a slight sports nut than your brother was. But
no, he's probably put it into me. So
I
will watch
full on now. You watch anything.
Thanks to him.
Hollywood water polo on channel 406.
Oh yeah, Kabaddi highlights.
Here we go. I like Kabaddi.
Yeah.
Kabaddi's great.
Yeah. Do you remember the field gun tournament at the tournament? You name it. Yeah, he's fully influenced. I have full blown sport. But to pick up on what you said, like, there's a great quote Stephen Fry said. I think he said this when England got to the final of the Euros and they were playing Italy, and ITV played this sort of wonderful poem that Stephen had written. He said, "Sport is unimportant, but it's the most important, unimportant thing in the world." I love that, because yes, there are so many people who'll be listening and go, "I couldn't give a monkeys about football or anything," but I think it unites billions of people on the planet in a way only maybe music does as well.
Yes, I think you're right.
It's crazy.
Yes, because you're part of it and yet not part of it. I suppose, in a very, very similar way. More than just an audience member like you are at the theatre, but with music, it reaches parts. Yes, I like that analogy. It's not, as you say, anyone who's got anyone in their life who they're suddenly thinking of now would do well to buy this book for them, but they should read it too. They should read it as well themselves to understand a little bit about the magic. It's alchemy that you describe, and you describe it quite beautifully, as one would expect from a writer who has worked on programmes such as The Thick of It and Have I Got News for You? So
yes,
the other element of your existence, which I think the only reason we could get in touch with each other was because I follow your alter ego on Twitter. Your alter ego, which is going to come as quite a surprise to people if they're not already aware of this, because it's not a secret, is that you are the man behind the bin.
That's true. I'm a very, 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 very close friend of Count Binface, the alien politician, and currently officially London's 9th choice to be mayor, James.
Is he? I appreciate you speak for him. Is he running this time? Is he going to be in that? He beat Piers Corbyn. He beat Piers Corbyn last time, didn't he?
He has beaten Piers Corbyn and UKIP twice.
There you go.
Not only in London mayor, but also in the Uxbridge by-election, where you'll be pleased to hear that not only did Binface stand against Boris in 2019, Binface was the only candidate who said he'd stand for a whole parliament, and then in the by-election kept his word and stood again. So he's
he is the trust candidate.
He is. But he would love to stand. And the scoop is that the deposit to stand for an MP, you probably know, is £500, which is that's a decent whack.
Yes, it is.
To stand for London mayor, it's a cool 10 grand.
Good Lord.
So Binface has his lid in hand, and he has until the end of March to raise £10,000 from the good people of Earth. So
I think the trick is to get a very right-wing billionaire to sponsor you, isn't it? And then you can say, I think that seems to be how other people manage to throw their hat into the London mayoral ring. I'd talk a little in a moment about your work on Have I Got News for You, because you've just put together the sort of end of year roundup. But back to the book, back to A Fan for All Seasons. It's one of the last things I did with my dad before we lost him, which was 11 years ago, was we went to a game together, and it wasn't something we'd actually done that much. But I started going a lot more to kiddie games, often on my own as well, because I don't know, it was not unlike going to church. There was a sort of, I felt he was closer to me there.
Do you know what? I had exactly the same experience. A lot of the sport I went to on my own. And it really is like a modern religion. And a lot of these comparisons, you might say, are glib. They're modern temples. The fans go on a certain time. They have a fixed period. They sing the songs like hymns. They worship. They have the people they adore.
Ritual.
it's ritual and it's community. And you see these people and you watch them getting together, and the game is where they all meet up and share their stories. And there is something beautiful about it, which I think, given a lot of sport gets a negative press, it's something I think that doesn't get said as much as it should.
I think you're absolutely right. But I don't know that I mean, we've joked, or not even joked, we've acknowledged the allure of kabaddi and rifle shooting. Is Rubik's cubing really a spectator sport?
Very good question. And I said the same thing. So I got invited by a friend of mine whose job is, he's a professional mathematician. In fact, a comedy mathematician, if those things aren't an oxymoron. And he said, come along. And I was in this sort of phase of life where I was saying, I can't say no to things. Again, it's part of grief. It's just opening yourself up to new things. And I'd been to all these different bits and bobs. I've been to handball and in Paris and all sorts of things. And then this Rubik's Cube thing came up, and I did think, is it a sport? But I thought, I can't not go. And my God, it is. Because what is a sport?
Yes.
It's doing something with physical skill to the nth degree. James, what do you reckon the world record is?
I think it's about 8 seconds.
I think someone's just put it under 4.
You're joking.
4 seconds to do it once.
Good God.
And they can do it 30 seconds with one
You'd
hand.
have to watch it in slow motion, wouldn't you? You wouldn't.
It's a blur.
Okay, you've sold it.
It's incredible. And
Keith, book some tickets.
Well, it's every 2 years, and it goes around the world like the World Cup.
Extraordinary.
It's incredible.
Truly
And there's actually a documentary that got Oscar nominated about it. You can catch online. It's worth Googling. It's incredible.
They do 2 at the same time now, don't they?
Yeah.
They juggle them while
they
doing
do them blindfold.
They're doing how can you do it blindfold?
So what you do is you examine the cube.
Oh my days!
And then you put the blindfold on.
Go.
And then at the end of it, you put your blindfold up, and they can do that in 30 seconds.
Oh, this is extraordinary. You are responsible with others, I presume, for putting together the Have I Got News for You review of the year, the sort of succession of clips. I've often wondered how satirists or topical comedy copes when reality is so utterly bonkers stroke hilarious.
Well, it's incredible. I mean, I had the luckiest job in the world with that. So obviously, I have written for the show, but I produced this best of at the end of the year. I've been doing it since 2010. So I could call it now that's what I call satire. It's sort of like a mega mix of the year.
I mean, we're up to volume 13 as well.
Yeah, but you chart the episodes from 2010 to now,
that's the
and
period.
You see how things have changed.
That's the period, isn't it? Of the slow detachment from reality even, but certainly normality.
Yeah, I've had to watch the news sort of become the charade it is while becoming Count Binface and thinking, how am I not the most surreal thing? I mean, it's absolutely mad. But yeah, I mean, I have this joy. I get to watch all the episodes back at home, and I cut it all together because I do a lot of online mashups myself.
Right, yes.
So one of the most famous ones I did, I turned the opening sequence of Succession into a Boris Johnson parody a few years ago.
That was sensational.
That was me. And so I do this sort of mashup show, and it's on this Friday, and it is a joy. And this year's been an absolute. I mean, I suppose it's a pre-watershed. I think you can imagine the word I'm thinking.
Yes,
of. It's one of those. Because I mean,
it's a word that might have popped up in the thick of it a few times.
Exactly. Yeah, I think we all used it about Liz Truss.
Does your bell go off? Does something happens? You've got the news on, or something pops up, and you just know that's going straight in. Even in January.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, there are certain things that always pop up. There's usually a royal segment. So obviously this year it was the coronation. And God, there's enough. You could fill a show on that. Really but then there's stuff in America. There's the Boris Johnson thing. I mean, as I was cutting that, you forget. It almost feels like last year that he was thrown out of Parliament. So much has happened since the summer.
Yes.
And so there was all that. Then the COVID inquiry and the stuff that Cummings was saying in the text, which again, pre-watershed I won't say again. No, but there is so much fun. And of course, some of the weirder stories are just as much fun, like the loss of the rusty pole in Exmouth. Do you know about that?
I do remember that. Yes, I do. Amazing. What a year. I look forward to seeing that on Friday. Cool. As the book does, and indeed as reviews have picked up, it always comes back to Dan. So we should do that as well. I think perhaps the most powerful line I read is that we are reading conversations they could not have. So it is a book about grief, but also a book about fanaticism and the.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is, you must have that feeling now that we live our lives on phones so much, where when someone dies, you just imagine you can text them or WhatsApp them, and it's that feeling that they're not there anymore. They're not in the ether, and yet they feel like they are. Is one of the most maddening things about a grief. And sport was a way of managing to cope, because I was having this conversation. I was the one still seeing this stuff, obviously absolutely craving him to still be there during the darts, the moment, or the snooker's just been. And I just absolutely have that. You can't describe that yearning to tell your loved one about what's just happened. But being there to still, it makes me grateful for what I'm able to see, and it helps me appreciate life all the more to see it for Dan as well.
That's beautifully put. You honour his memory. A Fan for All Seasons by John Harvey. A Journey Through Life and Sport is out now in the non-fiction section of bookshops, where you might also... No, I'll resist that. It's coming up to 12 noon. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I can tell you some breaking news. A judge has ruled that the media will be able to publicly name the killers of teenager Brianna Ghey, and that will be at the start of their sentencing on the 2nd of February 2024. Time now, though, for the news headlines. 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 For the news headlines.